So tell us a little more then about your own personal experience of these last few months. You're joining us from California today, and you were in Japan at the start of the global lockdown, as it were. So you've at least had the benefit of some travel in between. For many of us, that's not something we've actually had. So perhaps you could give us an indication of what that's been like, and what your personal takeaways have been.
Yes, so to start with the travel, of course, travel these days is easier than it's ever been. I flew from Japan to California, as I was saying, when my mother came out of the hospital. The plane was almost empty. The customs hall was completely deserted. The customs officials were really observing social distancing with a vengeance. So I've never had an easier flight. I just picked up my suitcase, walked to my next flight, and the next flight there were 80 seats and only 2 people on it. So that part is simple. I know that going forwards, people will be apprehensive about plane travel as they haven't been before, and I know plane travel could be more expensive and less frequent than it has been. But the actual physical movements hasn't been hard. One time I was traveling across the Pacific to give a lecture after the pandemic broke out, and I'd contracted to give the lecture. I couldn't say I wasn't going to give it. The next time I was traveling, as I say, to see my mother. 3 weeks from now, I'm planning to go back to Japan to see the rest of my family who are over there. But it's a reminder that most of the bad things that happen to us in life happen within half a mile of our home. And this pandemic has really brought that home to us. So I know that people are going to feel uncertain in planes on 12-hour flights, but I think being around lots of people who are not wearing masks here in California feels to me much more unsettling than the travel part. In terms of what I've been making of the pandemic, I always remember how when my house was lost in a forest fire, and I literally lost everything in the world, initially I was very shocked and taken aback. But a few months later, as I started to remake my life, literally as we were drawing up the plans for a new architectural model of a new home, I thought, how can this move me to live differently? And I noticed I could live with far fewer clothes and books and furniture than I had before. I realized that all my notes had been burnt down. Now I had to write more from imagination or memory, as you were saying. I realized I didn't have a physical home in California, so maybe I should spend more time in my heart's home, which is Japan. And so in certain ways, that disaster of losing everything in the world opened certain doors and windows in my life that might otherwise have been closed, and actually allowed me to live much closer to the way I'd always wanted to live. And it enforced my sense that what happens to us is much less important than what we make of what happens to us. In other words, your house burns down in a fire, but it's the feelings and thoughts you bring to that really define what's going to be your life, much more than just the fire alone. So all of us across the globe really have shared these very displacing and unsettling circumstances these last 8 months. But I think some people have seen this as a chance to make a new life, and others have thought, oh, why can't I get back into my old life? But it's really a choice, I feel, that we can make. We can either think about the many things we have, which usually are a cause for gratitude, or we can think of the many things that we don't have, which are usually a recipe for frustration. But I feel it's up to me to make the most of this. I can't wish things are otherwise. That's only going to lead to more exasperation. I have to work with what I've got. And what I've got so far has been plenty.
Let's talk a little bit more about that. I mean, of course, the words of Hamlet that you quote quite often come to mind. Nothing is good or bad, but thinking makes it so. And honestly, so many of us are menaced by our thoughts right now. There are anxieties stemming from loss, whether it's bereavement or loss of work or anxiety about the future. But one thing the pandemic has also taught us is how little we actually need. Having said that, if we all start leading frugal, minimalist lives, then a global economy that hinges on consumerism is likely to go bust quite soon. So your thoughts on that?
Well, I think the inner economy is more important to our well-being in some ways than the global economy. But I love what you said. And it goes back, I have had the fortune, as Bachi was saying, of traveling a lot with the Dalai Lama. And I think what he's been stressing is exactly what you were saying, which is that if we get into a state of anxiety, we're really making things worse and worse. So I was very moved. I once traveled with him to an area that had been laid waste by the tsunami in Japan in 2011. And of course, people there were grieving and sobbing and looking everywhere for direction. And he said, the best thing you can do to honor the people you've lost is think about what kind of future they would like, and create the new community that the people who are no longer with us would have wanted to see arrive. You can't change the past. What you can change is the future. So please concentrate on that. And of course, His Holiness often cites this ancient wisdom from Shantideva, the 8th century philosopher. If you've got a problem and you can't solve it, stop worrying about it. There's no solution. And if you can solve it, find the solution. Stop worrying about it too. But worry actually takes us away from clear-sightedness, and that's probably what we most need. And I don't mean to be glib or facile and say we shouldn't worry. I worry all the time, but I'm also conscious that my worries usually are preventing me from seeing things more realistically. And I think, among other things, this season has been a crash course in realism. Not what any of us would have liked, but perhaps what the planet needed, because I feel in the last few years, nature has been sending us many emergency messages, and we've just been sending it to voicemail. We've been proceeding as if we don't have to think about it until the world ends. And this has forced us to stop.